Rebekah Roth here again. And as the title says, it's all about the timing. And I want to talk to you about the 4 flights on 9/11. We in the business would call them breakfast flights, so I'll let you know what we talk about. I want to go over the timing of these flights just to show you how possible or impossible a hijacking was on those 4 flights back in 2001. There was a lot of competition at that time between airlines, and we competed for on-time departures, on-time arrivals, and believe it or not, I know things have changed, but we even competed for our in-flight service. And we were to get out the beverage carts and the meal service and get it started as soon as possible. Some airlines had a 15 to 20 minute goal. They wanted preferably beverage carts to be out in that aisle as soon as we possibly could. And this is important because the official 9/11 story has a huge problem. And I want to briefly review each flight. To begin with, let's talk about the first flight that left Boston. And a flight attendant first will be taking their jump seat. As soon as the captain announces flight attendants prepare for departure, that means we are ready to roll. And during that time, you may notice that flight attendants will often sit on their hands with their palms up in a brace position, and we stay there for a while. Now, the first several minutes of the flight, we are climbing out to about 10,000 feet. And that usually takes 5 to 7 minutes. So for this conversation, we'll say that it takes 6. And then after we're out of that, that's called the sterile cockpit. And at that time, nobody can make a phone call to the pilots unless there's a major emergency on board, like a fire. There's nobody making a phone call. Nobody's going to the cockpit for that first, let's say, average 6 minutes. After the plane reaches 10,000 feet, this is when the flight attendant or the purser would say, you're safe to use your electronic devices, blah, blah, blah. And after about 12 minutes from takeoff, once the plane begins to level off some, at that point we usually get up out of our jump seat. Now, the flight attendants and coach might take a minute or 2 longer, but this is a general idea. At that time, we'll change our shoes and put some flat shoes on, hang our uniform jackets, and maybe check our lipstick and take a quick trip to the lab, and then we start going to work. In 2001, you might remember that we even rented headsets. So we'd go through the aisles and rent the headsets out to people. But we're busy in the galley making coffee, setting up beverage carts, folding linens, all of that type of stuff, until the airplane is leveling off more, and then we can start rolling our carts down the aisle. And that is usually between 20 and 23 minutes after takeoff. That's an average. May take a couple minutes longer in the back, but that's the average. And we'll have our beverage carts, and sometimes on these early morning flights, we call them breakfast flights, there'd be a meal cart and a beverage cart in the aisle. We do like to get breakfast underway as soon as possible because we realize that everybody's been on a rush. Maybe they're stuck in morning traffic and there was a long line at security and that sort of thing. So we try to accommodate you to get the food and beverage out right away, especially on those early morning flights. When you look at Flight 11, a flight attendant named Betty called in and she claimed 18 minutes after takeoff, with a panic, she called a reservation line. And her complaint at that time was that the pilots were not answering their phone. What an odd complaint. Why not just walk up there and see what's going on? She was very nebulous and vague in her comments. But remember, there would be a sterile cockpit for the first 6 minutes of the flight. So let's take it to 8:06. Betty should have gotten up about 8:12, maybe 8:13, and been 5 minutes into working in the galley or the aisle, getting things prepped to start the meal service and beverage service. But she didn't. At 18 minutes after takeoff, she said she was still sitting in her jump seat. I want to know why didn't she get up and do her typical things? That just doesn't make sense. But here's where it gets kind of complicated. When she makes a call into the reservations person after 18 minutes. I mean, keep in mind that first 6 minutes, she couldn't call the cockpit anyway. And I always thought maybe they were landing, but I digress. Betty's still sitting there in her jump seat. She never went to work to do her, her normal job. She didn't know there was a hijacker on board. She said that. I don't know what's happening. Maybe we're being hijacked. She sat in her jump seat until 8:46. Had that been crew been doing their normal procedures, working as a flight attendant, they would have been very busy preparing the food service, and they would have been out in the aisle by roughly 8:20, right around the time her and her co-worker, Amy Sweeney, started making the phone calls. I always thought it was odd that no passengers came back to the galley to ask for a cup of coffee because they couldn't wait any longer, because that's what normally would happen. So the first 15 minutes of their flight, you're on climb out. That plane is coming out steep. And so that's why the seatbelt sign's on. It's not easy to walk around the plane. Even for us, then we're kind of used to it. Over the years, I've had to get up and do something on climb out like that because there was somebody choking or having an emergency. So I know how difficult it is, and we're used to that. But passengers aren't used to that. But in the first 18 minutes of this flight, we're told that 2 flight attendants were stabbed, the cockpit was breached, 2 military-trained pilots were removed from their seats, out of the cockpit, possibly, and then a passenger had their throat slit. And then Amy said that the people in business class and first class had no idea what was going on. I don't know what they thought the carotid blood was spraying around the cabin. Hello? But that's what she said. So it's pretty hard to believe their story. One, the flight attendants were in total conflict. Betty said several times she was in a jump seat. Amy said they were in the second to the last row seat in coach. So if you look at this, you can see what we do. Brace for impact. We get up after about 12 minutes, and by 20 minutes after takeoff, we're out there serving. So you can see this how actually the case with every one of the 4 flights on 9/11, because the official government story basically has the hijacking starting when we're about 10 minutes into, maybe 15 minutes into the meal service once going through the first time. But then when we get to the galley, we turn around, we pull those carts back, and we start picking up the trays again that our people are finished. So you can go by every flight one by one by one. And the government story says they basically started 28 or 31 minutes into the flight, and that literally is a smack dab in the middle of the flight. The meal service with beverage carts and meal carts in the aisle. Now, even up in first class, we oftentimes would pull out we call them a carrier, but a 3-tier cart or a carrier, and we would set it up and use it for extra counter space because there's not much space up there. And sometimes that would actually be pulled out, kind of blocking the cockpit. So hard to imagine how anything happened. But so inside from the flight attendant's viewpoint, the official government story of what time exactly the hijacking started and the pilots supposedly couldn't talk to air traffic control and all that is completely impossible to believe from an insider's perspective. And I just wanted you to know that.